Right, good afternoon, everyone. Fabulous to have you joining us this afternoon. It's always a weird thing to say that it's fabulous to have you joining us this afternoon, given that what we're doing today is discussing a solution to what is, in my opinion, and in what the research is telling us, the most significant problem that our schools are facing at the moment. We're facing plenty. There's plenty of challenges out there that you as school leaders could be tackling, but the top of the teacher stress research that we have at the moment continually, before a pandemic, during a pandemic, after the pandemic, points to student behaviour. And so I thank you for being brave enough in December to come along and have a chat about something that, to be really honest, is often painful for teachers. I know it's painful because I met a principal a few years ago, and I was at an in-person workshop called Leading Whole School Behaviour Improvement. He was a new principal, and he sat down on his own in the room, and I wandered over to him and I said, "How are you?" and introduced myself, and I said, I asked him, "What are you here for?" And he said, "Oh, so I'm a principal and new principal, and I just want some strategies. I really want some, some things to take back to help my people." I said, "Okay." I remember a really clever friend of mine who runs a charity called Hands Across the Water, Peter Bain, said to me once, he said, "Adam, if you really want to know how people are, and you really want to know the truth from people, you've got to ask them 3 times. But I'll try it out, Bainesy." So I said to this principal, "Can I ask, what are you really doing here?" And he said, "Look," he said, "I've been the principal of this school for a couple of months." He said, "Let's just say that what was on the brochure when I applied to be principal of the school is not exactly what the reality is. Things are hard. People are really struggling, and I've realised that I need to step into the struggle around student behaviour." I went, "Okay." I'm going to ask him one more time. I said, what are you really here for?" And he looked at me, and if I may speak so plainly, and I say this, I'm about to say a swear word, just in case you're in a not safe for work environment. He looked at me and he said, "I don't have the first fucking clue what to do about it." And that statement, along with a lot of the conversations that I've had with school leaders across 2023, and the direct request that I had from school leaders to actually unpack what is it that we're supposed to do about this challenge, mindful that so much of what we seem to do seems to not have the impact we're looking for. That challenge was put to me multiple times, and I felt that it was something that I couldn't ignore anymore. So that's why we set up this series of 3 webinars. So if you are joining today for the first time, probably a couple of things to know. One is that we have done the first 2 webinars, but if you haven't got them, just let us know, because we really want you to have the recordings of those in your hands. The first one was called "What Went Wrong?" So it was about, what are the mistakes we made. We looked at how we've kind of outsourced the task of improving whole school and student behaviour to programs in a number of different ways. We've done things like rely on knowledge transfer, as though teaching kids what respect is will suddenly make them respectful, or if they build the respect mural, that a bit of pixie dust will fall on them as they walk past and they'll become more respectful through the day. They don't, of course, they just get better at mural making. We looked at control bias that we have, which is setting up big matrices of behaviours and saying what we're going to do is make sure all these behaviours happen. And the way they're deployed in school is often that teachers are expected to kind of make sure that any breach outside that behaviour is followed through on, and how it's exhausting. And we just simply don't have the personnel to be able to follow a methodology that says we need to catch students every single time, or they're going to try and crack the system. We looked at skewed beliefs around the real world. We looked at the fact that a lot of teachers think that crime and punishment needs to be the model we deploy, chiefly because that's the way the real world works. That if you do the wrong thing in the world, that the authorities will deploy punishment upon you, and they don't. About how 90 to 94% of the time that we do things that are illegal and immoral, there's no negative consequence for us. Somehow you people turned out all right. You turned out school leaders. There are other reasons for that, and we can bring them to bear in our learning environments. And we also looked at values education and how a lot of us, particularly us older people, if you're of my vintage, we grew in schools that weren't painting murals and telling people what their values were. yet somehow we picked up those values along the way. And what it was because those schools had a much stronger behavioural focus, a lower level, a granular focus around the work they were doing rather than a more formal focus. In fact, when we make our values formal, they tend to represent marketing more than anything particularly meaningful. In the second webinar, we looked a little bit at our young people. We looked at who actually asked the question, who are these people? And we kind of used an analogy around the greenhouse and the plant, where we looked at the impact of social media and the way that it's changing the thinking patterns and belief systems of our young people in a way that's a little bit confronting, a little bit alarming. We got a bit deep and meaningful in this webinar, if I'm really honest. And then we looked at the plant, we looked at the health of the young people, and we looked at nutrition. And what we did was almost permission ourselves to step into the conversation around the way that not only we're treating young people or teaching young people, but we have ourselves permission to be in the conversation about the way we're growing them as a community. And I think that in some ways, around those big pervading influences, that's the best we can do. And if it's the best we can do, we should do it. So that's where we've come from in this journey. And today we're going to look at what exactly we do about that. I do want to kick off the webinar today, if I can, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I am meeting with you today on. I'm on beautiful Bunurong country in the Mornington Peninsula. It's a gorgeous day here, just south of Melbourne. Got the sun streaming through. I've got that slight concern that the sun's going to actually peak so low that you're going to see it creep up across my chin at some stage during the webinar. So if I need to, I'll lean over and pull the blind down just a little bit further. And I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that you're on today. I've always felt that it's almost the right webinar for me to do that with some to kind of dwell on that concept of acknowledging country for a moment, because it's about acknowledging place, and it's about us as leaders and chiefs of the culture of your school, building place, because place determines the way that the members of that culture conduct themselves, the way they behave. I want you to even think for a moment. You might today, I'll imagine you as being someone watching this webinar today, not in your office because the door could get knocked on at any moment. I'm going to imagine that you've stolen yourself away to a reclusive little meeting room that very few people know about or use. You've sort of designed so that the interruptions are likely to not come. You've pulled the blind down so nobody knows that you're in there. And you've got a nice quiet spot with which to engage. You haven't brought your phone. You're just going to make a couple of notes and try to soak up and make the most of the next 52 minutes with me. I'm going to imagine that. But the truth is you might not be. You know, you could be in your office ready for 15 different interruptions and you'll just sort of hit mute or something like that along the way. And that will impact the way that you engage and learn today. If you were watching it sitting outside in the sunshine and in the heat, then that could impact the way you're engaging today. You might be in your car. Maybe you've been at a meeting this morning, you've needed to head back and you're catching this in the car. You could be in a cafe. Hopefully, just if it's still lunchtime for you today, that you're having a coffee rather than something stronger, because either one of those could impact the way that you learn as well. Place determines the way that people engage and learn and conduct themselves and behave. And so I want us to stay cognizant of that lesson that we get from our traditional custodians here in Australia, and get really determined about building place. Final little reminder before we move forward is that this isn't, unless you're watching it as a recording later on, this isn't a TV show. So we're going to use the chat box extensively today. So if I've got it open now, and if you want to say hi in there, go ahead. I'll do what I can to monitor that and to be involved. I feel a bit like the old Romper Room TV show, where I can kind of see your names and who you are, and I could even reply to you if it feels appropriate to do so. So and if you have an interesting thought or a question, I'd really love you to use that chat box and make it available to you. So I want you to know that this is an interactive opportunity. We're going to use it to work with you. And I want you to seize the opportunity, if you can, to contextualise this work. And the context of a real Australian school seems like the right context for that. So let's take that opportunity. Alana's got Interesting context. Sitting at a desk with headphones on, supervising 3 Year 4 girls playing doctors. That seems like a realistic context to me, Alana. All right, let's get cracking. Today's webinar is So What Now What? And my inspiration for actually calling the third webinar in this series, So What Now What, comes from a reasonably famous TED Talk. Some of you may have seen it before. Layla's actually going to pop it into the chat box at some stage today, the link to this TED Talk by Linda Wayman. And Linda sort of spends about 15, 20 minutes yelling at you. So just giving you fair warning. She's got an incredibly strong speaking voice. And if I'm really honest, it takes a little getting used to. But her TED Talk is called How to Fix a Broken School. And she speaks to a story of being in America, in Philadelphia, and landing in a school as principal where the behaviour had gotten out of control, where it had hit rock bottom. And I guess I don't want to, and the picture is a bit provocative, isn't it, that I've got on this screen here? I don't give the impression that your school is some kind of disaster zone, but there has to be some reason that you registered for a webinar series around leading whole school behaviour improvement. And what Clive Wayman's TED Talk does for me is probably two things. One is it reminds me of why sometimes we get stuck in the negative. She speaks a lot to the problems that existed in her school. And you're probably here because you've got some. You know, it might be problems around student aggression. It might be problems around the way the teachers practice. It might be problems around the connection and the relational thing between students and teachers. It might be about the way we approach conflict and wrongdoing. It might be that you're under attack from the parents, but something's going on. There's some reason that's negative. That's the reason you're here. And what can happen is sometimes we get really bought into describing the problem to each other. And the more we describe the challenge and the problem to each other, the more we get blameful. So we start to look externally. We start to say someone else needs to take responsibility for this, but not me. And what Clive Wayman kind of speaks to is a slogan that she has, which is, so what, now what? Which is, okay, we've described the problem. So what, now what? What will we do about it? And while Clive Wayman's presentation of this is in some ways assertive, bordering on aggressive, the truth is also that the message that I get from watching her TED Talk is it's one of hope. It's one of deep love and belief that if we can build the right place around people, and if we as the chiefs of the culture can deploy some changes that make that place evident to the young people, then they will conduct themselves differently. And there is hope that the challenges you're facing now can be overcome. The premise that I come from in this presentation today is that the best way to tackle all of those individual challenges, some of the ones I just listed, some of the ones that you have in your head that I didn't list, is not to tackle them one by one. That sounds even exhausting to me. The best way to tackle them is by attending to the culture of your school. It's by assuming your mantle as leader as a cultural chief and bringing along with you all of the stakeholders who are in that tribe, and that is your staff. So what do we need to do in our first step to move forward? What is it that we need to change? First step is that we need to have a bias for implementing. We have to have a thirst for change, and we have to understand that the people who need to change are the staff. So we can look blamefully towards the parents should be teaching them this stuff. They're not, get over it. So what? They're not teaching them respect. Now what? What are we going to do about that? And if our staff is not positioned to change, if they're not even maybe a fraction excited to change, if they don't see that the change can support them to feel more effective and less stressed in their work, then you're going to find it very difficult in a change-fatigued environment to get them to make the changes that you will need them to make. Of the three stakeholders that comprise a school community, we're talking about the staff, the students, and the parent and carer community. We're just not going to find that the parents are going to get together en masse and go, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to reject all of the pressure that I get on social media to come out swinging at my school. I'm going to, bring a band of parents together, and we're going to have a rally in support of our local school, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. It's not going to happen. They are, in a lot of ways, members and subjects and followers of the culture that we as the chiefs create, and the students aren't going to do it either. They're not going to say, you know what, all that stuff that Adam talked about in webinar 2, we've actually noticed that. We're going to eat better. We're going to put the phones aside. We're going to stop being influenced by people who aren't influencing us, who shouldn't be influencing us, like, multi-billionaire social media tech what do they call it? Oligarchs. And what we're going to do is start listening to our parents and our teachers more. They're not going to do that. The change needs to come from our staff. So what we need to see ourselves is as the chiefs of the culture, and you need to be the head tribal chief in that ambition. What I'm going to do today is to show you what you need to lead, what you need to get other people to do in order to get the change in behaviour you're looking for in your school. If we want our students and our parents to behave differently, then we're going to have to be the ones that change first. Okay, so before I do kind of get into that, I'm just going to click off this slide here and go blank for just a moment. I want to point out something to you, and that is that for most people, they understand that change happens slowly, that cultures change slowly. So looking for a really quick fix on this is not going to be the way it works. Even around moving behaviour forward, what we know is that most behavioural shift isn't some kind of epiphany, that it is slow, steady, gradual. So one of the things that we're going to keep in mind is that the most meaningful behavioural shifts tend to be an improvement in the frequency and severity of targeted behaviours. So we're not going to look for quick fixes anymore. We're not going to look for inspirational speakers. So don't ring up and ask me to come and be an inspirational speaker in your school. It's not going to happen. We're going to slowly, over a period of time, and the research is that it's about 2 to 3 years to get a genuine and a sustained normalising of a new culture in a school that has both the chiefs behaving differently and the members falling in line. So it takes time. And what I'm going to unpack for you today is a model and a methodology. So it's a bit like, okay, this is kind of it's a bit like a cooking show. I'm going to show you what it is we need to cook. And it's the 3 key drivers of a culture. It's language, it's conduct, and it's our mindsets. And then I'm going to give you a bit of a method for how to whip it up. And we've been doing that. I'm going to be unashamed about this right now. We've been doing that for several years now with Australian schools. We've actually got right now 245 schools who are currently making that shift in their schools. I'm absurdly proud of them. And then I'm going to show you why that's the model. And then I'm going to show you the methodology of how we cook it, if that's okay. The principle that I want you to apply here as I reveal the model is what I call the imagine if principle. So what I want you to do is to kind of imagine that a lot of the little things that may seem inconsequential to you as I reveal the model, imagine if they everybody over at your school got really good at these small suggested shifts over an extensive period of time. Imagine if. So what we know is that, and this is very much what we researched. Well, I researched it when I started to work out how to work restoratively in a school. What I first realised is that the implementation and the model for working restoratively in school fell short of what schools were looking for. They weren't looking for a set of question cards to deploy when only the very worst incidents happen. They actually discovered and reported to me that in some cases, that created increased confusion, increased inconsistency, and a rise in student behaviour challenges, because the kids are constantly trying to work out when we're going to be restorative and when we're going to be punitive in the way that we work. So I realised that what I needed to develop was a more thorough, a more comprehensive model, a more proactive rather than reactive model that pays respect to the nature of a school. Schools are busy, schools are informal. And so what we need to do from a cultural point of view is say, what's the contribution we can make at that busy and informal end so that we don't have to, as often, kind of flip to a more a model around formal questions being asked off a card, which is a judicial way of working. Schools are not judicial systems, they're learning systems. So how do we weave these principles into the everyday learning that we want our young people to do, and not just the people who are inclined to the worst behavioural indiscretions? So the first, I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to describe this model to you as crazy fast as I can. All right, I'm going to go absolutely bonkers on this, and my team actually at Real Schools experienced my dress rehearsal for this last week. I had a go at seeing if I could get through this in 5 minutes or so. And I'm going to make the work you do the imagine if principle. So imagine if everything I suggest to you actually happens in your school. Imagine if that became your culture, and imagine how those problems we described at the start of the webinar might be easier to overcome if we did this. So, ready to go? All right, good. Domain one of any culture is language. If we want our culture to change, there is no way to do it without changing the way that the chiefs speak. People are noticing what the chiefs say, and they're noticing how they say it. What we need to do in a school is to help schools to be able to change their language in 4 key ways. The first way we help schools to change is effective language. And what that means is that anytime there's a positive or a negative behavior happen of a really low level, we, instead of saying, hey, pick that up, or you're a really good boy, we say to them, disappoints me to see you do that, put it in the bin, or I'm really impressed to see you do that, that's great learning. And the words you will have heard me say the loudest then are disappointed and impressed. And it's because that's activating more of your brain matter. It's activating your neocortex, where your vocabulary is stored. And it's also activating your limbic system, your emotional center. And what you're doing in time with that is giving the opportunity for the earth to tilt a little bit, which means that there's a better chance that the student's going to pick up the paper. But in the long term, what you're doing is providing all of the young people in your school with valuable information for how they can self-regulate themselves through your system by making better decisions. What you're doing is providing young people with enough information to be able to have a gap between impulse, I really want to drop this, I really want to throw this, I really want to swear, to action, the choice to actually deploy that behavior. In that gap, we actually can insert a thought. It won't be profound, it won't be fabulous. It'll just be, nah, I probably shouldn't. In which case, on yard duty, you might observe a different behavior to an apple being thrown across a basketball court, and you might notice that apple being put in the bin. You can use an effective word for that. Most teachers tell me that there are hundreds of opportunities every single day to be able to just say what you were normally going to say and throw in a feelings word. If you only got 50 in a school of 40 staff members, then you just found 2,000 daily reminders to young people that their conduct affects other people in an environment that says you should care about that. You found 10,000 a week, you found 100,000 a term, you found 400,000 in a year. That is language driving culture. Imagine if every staff member in your school started to roll out 50 a day. Imagine if they coupled that with a second change in language, which is around stored responses. Imagine for the times that we do get emotional, we do get stuck in that limbic system as teachers. I don't know about you, but I've been stuck for words. I've been worse than stuck for words. I've said some strange stuff in the classroom when I've gotten emotional, when I've felt that I'm a little bit out of control. And so what I've done is I've identified areas where I've been able to kind of store a response in my neocortex for moments that get emotional, because if I have to come up with the time, I'm going to say strange stuff. And what I do, for instance, when students call out is say, unfortunately, I can't listen when people call out, but I can listen to you because of the way you're sitting right now. Anything you want me to clarify? And the kid I'm looking at on this side of the room is freaking out, but it's not for that kid, it's for the one over there. And what we're doing in this situation now is being able to make ourselves be effective, not get off track, and make sure that the young people are motivated by progress of me staying on the task of good instruction and good learning activity, rather than going off on some strange limbic rant. The key to inconsistency, if that sounds like something that's desirable for you, it shouldn't. The key to inconsistency is letting our emotions choose our language for us. And if every staff member in your school had 2 very clear stored responses for the 2 moments that get the most emotional in the classroom, in the classroom or in the playground, and if you coupled that with the ability to be able to use effective language whenever a low-level behavior of positive or negative nature happens, imagine that. Imagine if. What about positive priming as a third change? What if we just made a decision as a staff that we would speak more to behaviours that we want to see rather than behaviours we don't want to see? What if we understood that the power of suggestion in our words, in our language, is incredibly strong? What if you understood that if I say to you right now, don't, Don't think of a pink elephant. Do not, I mean it, don't do it. Don't think of that pink elephant. It's not about this big. It's not fluffy. It's not cute. It doesn't have a white ribbon around its neck. It doesn't have a little bell on that ribbon. It doesn't look adorable. You do not want to put it on your child's bedside table. Do not think of that elephant. I know what you're doing. You're exactly thinking. This is the power of suggestion in our words. And this is fundamentally the reason that in schools don't work. One of the key shifts that a school can make is to say, I'm going to move the needle about from the amount of don'ts we speak a little further across to the do's. Because if I say to young people who are walking out into the yard, don't fight like you did yesterday, I've planted the idea in their head. I've helped them to visualize a behavior that is on the horizon and that the impulse and the opportunity for demonstrating is coming. But if I say to them, go outside and play cricket today, I can't wait to find out who scored the most runs. I reckon it'll be Cam. You'll find yourself in a weird little argument about whether it'll be Cam, Dimitri, Mohammed, or Fred. And that's a fun conversation to be in. And it paints a picture in their heads for a behavior that is possible and available on the horizon. We need to speak more to the behaviors we want to see than the behaviors we don't. And then the fourth thing I want to do is to actually get your school to embrace stakeholder protection by not speaking negatively about the members in particular, the students and the parents through negative labels. Because there's one thing that we do with negative labels, we live up to them. We don't need stakeholders in your school that are already hard to engage, believing that you believe that they're a pain in the neck. And we especially don't need our colleagues believing that your staff room is a place where in their absence, they might have their reputation slaughtered. We can't have it. And imagine if your school, just in the language domain, started to roll out more of the effective language, say what you already say, chuck in a feelings word. Imagine they had a couple of stored responses for the things that get them off track and saying strange stuff. Imagine they moved the needle a little bit on the positive priming across to talking about behaviors they want to see rather than the ones they don't. And imagine if the stakeholders in your school felt psychologically safe by knowing that this isn't a place where they get labeled negatively. Imagine that. Imagine on the conduct space, if we just move domains now, imagine if every time that a teacher's radar pinged, because I reckon teachers do, and I reckon for some reason we found ourselves in a position where we're not trusting our radar. And I reckon what happens to a lot of teachers and school leaders is that their radar pings and tells them that behavior, that was worth a chat. It's not something they needed to because we're a remind, warn, act school. We need to remind them. You don't need to be reminded that you didn't need to do something incredibly harmful around this. What you need is for a teacher who has radar ping and goes, that's worth a chat, to actually come over to you and have a chat. And what if that chat was conducted the same way? What if it was called an effective interaction? Imagine if a quick past, present, future conversation that looked like, well, what was going on there? How do you reckon that made other people feel? What are you going to do about that so that we can both walk on and leave this behind? Any help you need? What if that kind of conversation became normalized in your school? And what if that was the hallmark of your ambitions to be consistent in your school? Imagine what was possible there. Called an effective interaction. Imagine at a group situation, if we deployed a methodology that we teach all our partner schools called P3, F3, where we talk about the past for 3 minutes, not a 1 hour episode of Education CSI. Because at the end of the education episode of CSI, you've got 6 pages of statements from witnesses that you've called, and you've still got no idea who's telling the truth. The system is encouraging our young people to lie. What if the system was, give me a gist of what happened, let's talk a little bit about how that's impacting people, and let's mobilize you in actions that gets rid of that trouble, that gets rid of that harm. And we position ourselves as educators, as facilitators of that smart conversation, and thankers and congratulators of young people who actually take that personal responsibility. What if we could get good at that? Instead of spending an hour on it, we spend 9 minutes and it ends with a smile. Could you imagine that? And imagine if our conduct as educators was that we don't have to stand in front of the room. We don't have to treat the room as though it's a place we perform. I would contend to you that one of the most corrosive elements that exists in our schools in Australia is the proliferation of the term teacher performance. Your teachers are not performing SEALs. They don't need to stand there and entertain young people into being interested about calculus. Their job is to create an environment that tilts the earth in favour of young people wanting to learn, and then being curious about what happens from there. And what if some of the architecture that we're in a lot of schools finding ourselves kind of defaulting back into, particularly after states that have been affected by remote learning and where teachers have had to deliver and perform down the screen, what if the architecture wasn't so authoritarian with a key figure at the front of the room trying to force the other people sitting to engage? What if it was circular? What if our classrooms looked like we were working together? What if I looked a little like one of our year 8 teachers who sent us a message from her tech studies class last week of her classroom that has all the tables to the edge of the room and all of the students sitting at chairs, and then when they arrive facing the wall? Bit weird, isn't it? She sits at the front of the room. And what happens on a chair? And what happens when she sits down and she says, could everyone just turn their chairs around, and finds themselves instantly in a circle? What happens when that teacher doesn't need to repeat her instruction because the architecture doesn't tell the students that it's the teacher's job to perform their way into making you listen? What if it feels to the students that this class is a group project and I should pay attention? How much coaching, how much support, how much help can a teacher provide when they don't have to waste their time repeating their instruction 3, 4, and 5 times in the classroom? Well, this teacher tells us that she's reconciling a little bit of guilt because it doesn't feel quite right to her that she's now sitting more than she ever has in a classroom, speaking less than she ever has in a classroom, and yet watching the students get so much more done. What if one of the keys to having young people improve their behaviour in our classrooms is that they're too occupied with the thrill of achievement and making progress to play up? Imagine that. And imagine those 3 key suggestions around effective interactions, P3, P3, F3, and the deployment where possible of circle architecture were combined with the 4 suggestions that I made around language. And then imagine that we chose a different mindset around the way that we are going to punish and provide consequences for young people based on assessments of harm, not on an assessment of the offence because we never saw it. What if? Imagine if we had a staff full who had abandoned their attachment to outcomes and said, you know what, inviting a whole bunch of young people to stand in the middle of our plans is likely to produce a variety of outcomes. And what if they had agreed on a really simple, explicit practice framework like this that just said, I reckon if we just lean back into here, we'll find ways to make this a little bit better. What if we also kind of abandoned our attachment to needing to be authoritarian in the learning environment and instead chose to be authoritative? And what if we were actually really clear about what deters the behaviours that we're seeing in young people that are problematic for us and got to work on building culture rather than trying to be consistent about our reactions to that? Can you imagine that? This entire model is, I guess, what flows right over the top of this model is an intention to be fair. Young people don't need to be treated nicely. Young people don't need extrinsic rewards in order to behave accordingly. What they need is to feel like the environment is fair to them. It's to feel that it engages them. It's to feel that it explains things to them. It's to feel that the expectations are absurdly clear, even in environments where I've been falling short of those expectations. And what underpins it, what sort of sits under this model, is a really rigorous body of research around human emotion. It's been around for around 70 years now. It's called affect theory. It's developed by some genius professors in sociology, such as Sylvan Tompkins, and enhanced by Donald Nathanson, and deployed in a number of different challenging settings by fabulous Australians like Mark Thorsborn and Terry O'Connell and Peter Blood in Australia. And it's the key to understanding how human beings tick is to understand how they respond to shame. And what you'll find is that once your people have that research and knowledge in their hands, that they don't blame, they don't turn on themselves, they don't find answers in looking and saying, I wish the parents had raised them a bit differently. They find answers in the model that's sitting above that understanding. They're here. What if every time, can you imagine this? Every time there's a problem around student behaviour in school, all we needed to do is to put this on the wall and say, I reckon the answers are in here somewhere, because it reflects all the things that are important to us. Our pedagogy. Because if our pedagogy is not everything we say and how we say it, combined with everything we do and how we do it, what on earth is our pedagogy? And what people tend to notice also is that the changes needed to be made to work culturally are actually absurdly practical. They're not big programs. They're not series of mini lessons. They're not posters and murals. They're not theme days. What they are is small changes, such as effective language, positive priming, stored responses, and stakeholder protection. And what if the way we think is enacted in the way that we act? Would our philosophies for working with young people not be alive when we do that? would we not potentially have a protective factor in the way of teachers in your school getting to their car at the end of the day and saying forlornly to themselves in the rearview mirror, this is not what I got into teaching for? What if? Imagine if the teachers in your school actually got to their car and thought, actually, the things I did today were pretty close to what I believe about working with young people. Sure, I don't always get the outcome I'm looking for. It's not always sunshine and rainbows and unicorns, but at least what I did lines up with my deep philosophy about what it means to try and help young people find a positive life trajectory. Could you imagine that? One of the things that we've been helping schools who are keen to imagine that do is to implement it. Layla's going to pop into the chat box now a PDF on the impact that we've been able to have with those schools. We actually asked a huge cross-section of our schools last year to provide their data on what had been the shift from a pre and a post perspective in their school, and the way that impact had been happening from a multiple stakeholder point of view. So what's been the impact on staff, what's been the impact on parents, and what has been the impact on the students and their perception of their environment, of their place. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, the positive impact that we've been able to have in that 2 to 3 year commitment, because that's what it takes, to get this implemented properly. And what I thought I'd share with you now is that, first of all, that model is available to you. I sort of developed it and put it in writing. What do we do in our 3-year partnerships? We help schools get good at that model, learn it inside out and get good at it. Say that 5 times fast. So that book there that you can see on the screen now twice. I don't really know why I showed you the book, but anyway, I did. We thought the right thing to do about that book was to make it available to you and to your schools. So Layla's going to pop in the chat box the link to be able to access the book. It's free. You can get multiple copies if you want for your school. All you will do is pay the postage and handling, and regardless of whether you work with us on cooking this up, we're really happy for you to have a crack at it if that's what you want to do. And then there's the recipe, hey? How do you make this thing? So that was my challenge about a decade ago, when I realised, or I had the theory, I guess, the hypothesis that model was fit for purpose, that this was what schools were actually looking for. Oh, you got yours, Monique. That's good to know. Good to know they've arrived. It's a nice little Christmas present. It's a sort of read that I think does well with a pair of thongs and a cool drink, or on a holiday. So it'd be great to whack those in the pigeonholes of your teachers for the holidays. I reckon they'll enjoy it. It's not your average education read, I guess, is what I'm saying. And then how do you get it going in schools? So like I said, about a decade ago, I decided to explore how that model could be practical, and how we could provide the confidence for staff who are either early career or even the ones who are later career, who are often sometimes pretty wed to their old practice systems. How could we help chiefs like you, tribal chiefs, leaders of the tribe of teachers, as well as the entire tribe of your school community? How can we kind of package this up in a way that serves you and makes this possible for you? I looked at some research that had been done. It had actually been done overseas by the University of London. And the research was around bullying. And so what they did was they looked at the schools who, it was a bit of a reverse way of researching. They didn't like drop a program or an approach on a school and then see what the difference was in terms of bullying. They instead did nothing, and they just looked at schools that were recording pretty good responses and pretty good data around bullying, and then went and looked in those schools. It was about 1,300 schools, and went and looked for common factors in those schools. Now, of the 10 most common factors that were in those schools, there were about 7 or 8 that spoke directly to elements of working restoratively, elements that are within that model, and a couple of others that could be really complementary to it. Things like, how do we engage our parent community in this? How do we provide high levels of training and support for teachers? It's about modelling for teachers of these practices. And the number one common factor across those, I think it was 1,378 schools, was that they had adopted a restorative ethos and culture. There were no, in the top 10, branded bullying programs in there. Branded anti-bullying programs, I should say. So I looked at what were the common factors that were already within the restorative model, and I looked at some of the features that were also common in the way that they activated the stakeholders, parents and staff in particular, but also students, and developed a partnership model that, as I mentioned, we currently have 245 schools accessing. What's in the partnership model? This is the list. So effectively what's in the partnership model is every year, across a 3-year journey, a day of professional learning. Now, I'm going to be a fraction boastful, if you'll indulge me for a moment. Our PL days are world-class. They're extraordinary. They're enjoyable, they're thought-provoking. I had a staff member at a school last week tell me that it was the best effing day of PL he'd ever done. I found out later that it's the only day of PL he's ever done that he hasn't fallen asleep in at the back of the room, and I'm taking it. I'm running with it. But I want to be also super clear. There is not a day of professional learning in the world, even as good as our days, that has ever changed a school on its own. Yet I reckon I've fallen for it. I reckon I've run PL days as a principal without an implementation bias. That the bias has been for the presenter to deliver a terrific day, for the teachers to enjoy it, and for the presenter to leave with budget and applause. And that's not okay. That's actually not ethical. So we don't provide professional learning experiences to schools unless they share with us that bias for implementation. Everything else we do in partnership reflects that bias. So what we'll do is follow up after the PL day with an in-class support day, because the research says that teachers need modelling, they need co-teaching, and they need feedback from someone who's an expert and in a supportive way in that environment. So we run an extra day that's complementary to the PL day, where we come and provide those 3 services to targeted groups and individuals of teachers across the school. We often have like an assistant principal in a school that stalks us with an iPad and records a lot of what we're doing. That becomes fodder for an action plan that we develop as well. Finish the day with a big debrief amongst the whole staff. They share their kind of professional observations. They share their practice decisions they're making. They share their little light bulb moments, about what works and what doesn't in a contemporary classroom. And if I'm really honest, that's the day. The PL day builds the will and gives people some quick wins. But it's when we get our hands dirty with the practice that really good restorative practice starts to kind of go viral in the school. And that's far more an authentic momentum than any old whiz-bang PL day. One of the things that we picked up from the University of London research was the importance of informal and formal parent engagement. Comes in at number 5 and number 6 in their research, is that formal systems that engage the parents. So we run a parent engagement session in schools every year. And then informal. So we put little snippets in newsletters, provide all the text for that to our schools. We, even with a lot of our schools, produce a lot of little social media bits. We had one recently where a school had 3 boys sit down and had a fair bit of exposure to that P3, F3 methodology. And they described it in a video that they put on the school social media page and talked to how much better it is and how less often they're getting into trouble at school, and how they're actually, and this for me has become the marker of when a school is genuinely restorative in its nature, they're self-reporting when they fall short, saying we've made a mistake. We need to do one of those things where we take responsibility and fix it up. Can you help? And I think that's what a lot of schools would love to see as a marker of having won the game of cooking up the restorative school for your place. So that's really important that we engage our parent community. We also mentor the leaders in our schools. So they build an action plan. We populate that action plan with hyperlinks for all the resources they're going to need, all the professional readings that underpin ongoing learning, not one-off annual learning for your staff. The learning shows up in video, written, and podcast format for everyone, which is really fab. And we build what we call a student engagement plan, which is front facing. A lot of school leaders are telling me that the community's anxious, that the community's on edge, that the community is kind of on the attack and quite adversarial about the way that they're working. And a lot of our partners are saying it's really useful when you've got people coming to you in that state to be able to put their hands up and go, ooh, it's okay, everything's all right. Here's one page that I'm trying to get my hand in the right place. Here's one page that describes the way that you and your kid are going to be treated at our school. Have a read. Let me know if you've got any questions. Here to help. But to put their hands up and go, we've got this, it's all good, is something that's really valuable when you're dealing with particularly anxious people. We also coach teachers. So what we found is that in the implementation process for a lot of schools, it can only take a handful sometimes of recalcitrant people or struggling people to kind of really put an anchor on your progress. So we have to plug in. We have to make sure that nobody gets stuck behind an implementation barrier just because it's not working with 8B or with Jackson. So there's a lot of conversation that needs to underpin the implementation. And the way we do it is with the use of, although use is the wrong word, deployment perhaps, of an expert facilitator with each school. So they become part of the school's leadership team and walk side by side with the school delivering all of this work. And all of our expert facilitators have credibility. They have it because they're all not only former and successful teachers, they're former and successful principals. Authentic, credible, funny, available. They hand over the mobile phone. If it's to do with people and culture, if it's to do with conduct and behaviour, they want to know. And we have to be there for that real-time point of need support that's critical for schools. We also have to resource it. We have an amazing partner portal about to be launched where any staff member in a partner school can go into the portal, type in the thing that's driving them crazy, aggressive behaviour, non-compliance, disengagement, restorative circles, P3, P3, F3. They can pop that in there, and a list of articles and videos will pop up for them that they can access and get that support. We've got that support showing up on an app as well. And we also provide for our schools an enormous array of measurement tools to get an idea of where the students are at in terms of how they feel about self and school. That often produces some really important project points, and also for our school leaders to diagnose starting points. And we've actually got a tool for measuring teacher confidence and competence, which for a lot of our schools underpins their whole improvement journey. Improvement agenda. A journey is not a word. Agenda, which leans back into the concept I spoke about at the start. If you help your people invest positively and build capacity around culturally building the right place for your young people, a lot of the problems get overcome. And how would you know that you've kind of done that effectively? Teachers report that higher rates of their own competence. They're more capable, they're more effective in their work, and they know it. And they report higher levels of confidence, which means more of the problematic behaviours that stakeholders can bring to the culture of a school can be dealt with comfortably, easily, quickly, effectively. That's how you know that this works, and it does work. So we're going to give you some examples regardless of where you're at, in what type of school you have. Layla's going to pop in the chat box now some video case studies from some of our schools. I think I've got a couple of people in the room who are from these schools, so that's fabulous. But we want you to be able to see them. That we've picked some schools, some video testimonials from schools that we've got a secondary, a primary, an independent, a K-12, a special school in there, because we want you to know that these are principles that are more aligned to the way that people grow, and then allow you to respectfully understand that no matter the environment that you're in, and use rules that are quite true about the way that human beings learn to socialise in an environment like a school community or a learning environment. So please feel very free to copy and paste a couple of those or click on them while they're there in the chat box and have a look once we're Once we're done today, Layla will also pop in there. This is, I guess, a bit of a special offer. We don't usually provide this straight up, but Layla will also pop in that box a prospectus that will allow you to go back to your fellow leaders and to be able to have a chat with them about what's involved, if that's a journey you'd like to walk with us over the next 3 years, because we'd really like to. And if you think that this journey of so what, now what, if you think that the now what might include partnering with us at Real Schools, then we should chat. You can't, you'll notice, sign up by going to the website and saying, click, we want to become a Real Schools partner. It's not how it works. As I mentioned right near the start of the webinar, we need to pay full respect to the context of your school. And every school's different. And that means every starting point and every partnership needs to be tailored for that context. If we bring the good content that we've, I hope, not unpacked for you today as being highly valuable for schools, well-researched, and that sits on a really rigorous body of evidence and experience. If we bring that, and if we bring it in an environment that allows you to be the chief, you to be the expert on the context of your school, then in the overlap between cutting-edge content and respect for context, it's where the implementation happens. It's where we actually, if I may speak colloquially one more time, it's where we actually get shit done. And that's where we can genuinely improve whole school student behaviour for your school. If that sounds like a conversation worth having, then the QR code on the screen will allow you to book a time with me. If you're not QR inclined, that's cool. Plug that website, that little abbreviated website, into your browser, and you'll also be able to pick a time. And if there's not a time there that works for you, Layla will pop her email address in them. I don't know what I'd do without Layla. Layla will pop her email address in the chat box for you now, and just drop Layla a line, and we'll find a way to make sure that you get a time to sit down and have a chat. It might be, I know that it's December 5, so it might be in the next couple of weeks. It might be when your school shuts. It could be middle of January. It could be just before we go back. It might even be once you've got your feet back under the desk for 2024. But if 45 minutes to have a chat about the potential seems like could be well invested, then we should talk. All right, I'm going to finish up. I'll finish with gratitude, particularly for, I guess I'm grateful for the people who are here today. I'm absurdly grateful for the people who have registered for all 3 webinars. I'm grateful for anyone who's watching this as a recording. And please know that if there's any of the resources I've mentioned in this recording that you'd like to get your hands on, then just dropping Layla a line at the email address layla@realschools.com.au will allow you to have that opportunity. And mostly, I think I'm grateful that you keep doing it, that you keep showing up, that, like I said, there's a reason that you registered to come along to this or the series of webinars that I've run. And it's because it's hard, and that you continue to show up and do something that's hard but worthwhile is something that, even if we never see each other again, I'm really grateful for. So thanks so much for doing that. I'll leave it there. I'm just going to do a quick scan of the chat. Aaron, thank you. Appreciate that. Great to hear. We're looking forward to working with you as well. Good on you, Simon. Thank you, Monique. I've got some frequent flyers there that are just doing incredible work with this. I'm really proud to have you all there. Back at the team at Maryvale there, Simon. Merry Christmas to you all. And maybe that's a good note, hey? Merry Christmas, everyone. Have a great end to the year, however you celebrate it. And I'll see you all soon. Okay, bye for now.